The thing running alongside my 18-wheeler at 70 miles per hour had my face, and it was gaining on me. I'd been driving the Navajo Nation stretch of Highway 160 for 15 years, hauling freight from Gallup to Flagstaff, but I'd never seen anything keep pace with a Peterbilt at highway speed on 2 legs. Not until that night when the CB radio started crackling with my own voice, begging me to pull over. Let me back up. Name's Jake Morrison, and I've been hauling long distance since I got out of the Army back in 2009. Started with short runs, Phoenix to Tucson. Nothing fancy, but the real money's in the long hauls. The routes nobody else wants to take. Remote stretches through Indian country, late-night runs across empty desert highways where you might not see another soul for 3 hours straight. Most drivers won't touch those routes. They say the isolation gets to you. They're not wrong. That Tuesday started normal enough. I'd picked up a load of construction supplies in Albuquerque, bound for a job site outside Flagstaff. Standard run, one I'd done maybe 50 times before. The route takes you west on I-40, then north on 160 through the heart of Navajo land. Beautiful country during the day. Red rocks, endless sky. The kind of landscape that makes you understand why people fought wars over it. But at night, it's a different animal entirely. I'd left Albuquerque around 4 p.m., planning to hit Flagstaff by midnight with a fuel stop in Gallup. The sun was already sinking behind the mesas when I crossed into tribal land, painting everything the color of dried blood. That should have been my first warning. The desert was too quiet. No wildlife, no birds, not even the usual roadkill you'd expect on a highway that cuts through open range, just empty asphalt stretching toward the horizon. The CB had been dead silent for the past hour. Usually, you'd catch some chatter from other drivers, weather reports, smoky sightings, the usual road gossip, but that night, nothing. Just static and the low hum of my diesel engine eating up the miles. I was about 20 miles past Gallup when I first saw it in my passenger mirror. A shape running parallel to the truck, maybe 30 yards off the highway. At first, I figured it was a coyote, or maybe a stray dog. Animals do stupid things around big rigs. Chase the lights, run into traffic. But this thing was keeping perfect pace with me, and I was doing 75 in a fully loaded truck. I grabbed the CB handset. Breaker 19, this is Roadhog eastbound on 160, anybody copy? Static. Then, clear as day, my own voice came back through the radio. Pull over, Jake. I need help. My hands went cold on the steering wheel. I stared at the CB like it had grown fangs. The voice was mine, same tone. Same slight rasp from too many years of smoking, even the way I pronounced my own name. But I hadn't keyed the mic. I looked back at the passenger mirror. The shape was closer now, maybe 20 yards out, and it was definitely running upright. Human silhouette, but wrong somehow. The arm swung too loose, the stride covered too much ground, and it was gaining. Pull over, Jake. The CB crackled again. Something's wrong with the truck. I checked my gauges. Oil pressure good. Coolant, temp normal. Air brakes holding steady. Nothing wrong with the truck except the growing knot of ice in my gut. I keyed the mic with shaking fingers. Who is this? How do you know my name? Silence. Then laughter. My laughter. But hollow and wet like it was coming from the bottom of a well. That's when I made the mistake of looking directly at the thing in the mirror. It had my face, not similar features, not a resemblance. My exact face. Same weathered skin, same graying beard, same scar through my left eyebrow from a bar fight in Tucson 15 years ago. But the eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep, like staring into empty sockets. And the mouth. God. The mouth was stretched into a grin that went too wide, showing teeth that were too sharp and too many. It waved at me. A casual, friendly wave like we were old buddies passing on the street. I floored the accelerator. The Peterbilt lurched forward, engine roaring, speedometer climbing toward 85. In the mirror, the thing didn't fall behind. If anything, it seemed to be enjoying the chase, its impossible grin growing wider as it effortlessly matched my speed. The CB squawked again. "Jake, don't run from me. I just want to talk." My voice, perfect mimicry. But underneath the words I could hear something else. A wet clicking sound, like teeth chattering in a mouth full of blood. I grabbed my cell phone. No signal. Of course. The highway cut through a dead zone, where the nearest tower was 40 miles away. I was alone out here with whatever the hell was running alongside my truck, wearing my face like a mask. The thing was getting closer. 15 yards now, then 10. In the mirror, I could see details I didn't want to see. Its skin was too pale, almost translucent, with dark veins visible underneath like a roadmap of decay. Its clothes. Jesus, it was wearing my clothes. Same flannel shirt, same worn Carhartt jacket, even the same trucker cap I'd lost at a rest stop in Tucumcari last month. "Pull over," it said through the CB. And this time the voice was different. Desperate. Frightened. Like I was the one being chased. "Please, Jake. Something's following me. I need help." The acting was perfect. If I'd heard that voice on the radio without seeing the thing, I would have pulled over in a heartbeat. The terror sounded genuine, raw, but I could see its face in the mirror, still grinning that impossible grin while its mouth shaped words of fear. That's when the highway started to change. At first, I thought it was just fatigue. The yellow lines seemed to waver. The asphalt looked softer somehow, like it was breathing. But then, I noticed the mile markers. I passed mile marker 107 3 times in the past 10 minutes. The landscape was repeating, cycling, trapping me in some kind of loop where the same red mesas and twisted junipers flashed by over and over. The speedometer still read 85, but I wasn't getting anywhere. The fuel gauge hadn't moved. The clock on the dash was stuck at 11:22 p.m. "You can't run forever," my voice said through the CB. But now there was no pretense of fear, just cold amusement. This is our road now. Our road. I didn't like the sound of that. I tried downshifting, hitting the brakes, anything to break whatever cycle I was trapped in. The truck responded normally. Engine braking, air hissers releasing pressure, but the landscape kept repeating. Same curve around the mesa, same dead Joshua tree, same mile marker 107 sliding past in the headlights. The thing was right beside the truck now, running in the breakdown lane. I could hear its footsteps on the asphalt, a rhythmic slapping sound like bare feet on wet pavement. It turned its head toward me, and even through 2 panes of glass and 40 feet of distance, I could smell it. That metallic stench of old blood and something else, something rotten and sweet like meat left in the sundae. It tapped on the passenger window with one finger. The nail was black and curved like a claw. "Let me in, Jake," it said through the glass, voice muffled but still perfectly mine. "I'm tired of running." I punched the CB handset. "Mayday. Mayday. This is Jake Morrison on Highway 1. 60 mile marker 107. I need immediate assistance. Something's wrong out here. Dead static." Then, from somewhere behind me in the sleeper cab, I heard my own voice answer. "Nobody's coming, Jake. Nobody ever comes." I spun around. The sleeper was empty, just my rumpled sleeping bag and a few paperback novels. But the voice had definitely come from back there, clear as day. When I turned back to the road, the thing was gone from beside the truck. The passenger mirror showed only empty highway. For a moment, I felt a surge of relief. Maybe it had given up. fallen behind, moved on to torment some other poor bastard. Then I saw the silhouette on the hood of my truck. It was crouched there like a gargoyle, hands pressed flat against the windshield, face inches from the glass. Up close, I could see that its features weren't quite right after all. The proportions were off by just enough to trigger every instinctive alarm in my brain. The eyes were too large, the nose too narrow, the jaw slightly too wide, like a photograph of me that had been stretched in all the wrong directions. It mouthed something at me through the windshield. No sound, just lips moving in exaggerated shapes. I couldn't make out the words, but I could see its teeth. Rows of them, sharp as broken glass, going too far back into its throat. I hit the windshield wipers. The thing didn't budge. The rubber blade scraped uselessly against its back, and it turned its head to watch them with curious amusement. That's when I remembered what old Pete had told me at the truck stop in Grants last year. Pete Yazzie, Navajo driver who'd been running these roads since before I was born. He'd pulled me aside after a few too many beers and told me about things that hunted the highways at night. Shapeshifters that wore stolen faces and voices to lure drivers off the road. You ever see something that ain't right? He'd said. You don't stop. You don't answer. You don't even look at it direct if you can help it. You just drive and pray you make it to sunrise. The thing on my hood was watching me, remember? Head tilted like it could read my thoughts. It smiled, that too wide grin splitting its face almost in half. And then it began to change. The transformation was slow, deliberate, like it wanted me to see every detail. Its skin rippled like water, features flowing into new arrangements. The face elongated, jaw extending into something more snout-like. Its eyes darkened from brown to black, to something beyond black. Empty holes that seemed to pull light into them and never let it back out. But the worst part was the sound. Bones cracking and reforming. Wet sliding noises like raw meat being kneaded. And underneath it all, my voice whispering, "This is what you really look like, Jake. This is what you've always looked like inside." The highway loop broke. Suddenly, I was moving again. Really moving. The mile markers climbing past 108, 109. The speedometer showed 90 mile ph and rising. I hadn't touched the accelerator. The thing. I couldn't call it human anymore. Not even a shapeshifter wearing human form. Lifted one clawed hand and pointed ahead. In the distance, I could see lights. A truck stop. The kind of 24-hour oasis that every long-haul driver knows by heart. Fuel pumps, convenience store, restaurant, sleeping areas, safety. But as I got closer, something was wrong with the picture. The lights were too bright, too white, like they were burning with cold fire instead of electricity. There were trucks in the lot, dozens of them, but they sat too still. No idling engines. No movement, no signs of life. "Welcome home," the thing on my hood whispered, and its voice came from everywhere now. The CB, the air vents, the very steel frame of the truck itself. "We've been waiting for you." I tried to brake, tried to downshift, tried everything I could think of to slow down or change direction. The truck wouldn't respond. The steering wheel might as well have been welded in place. I was locked on course for the truck stop whether I wanted to go there or not. As I got closer, I could see the other drivers through their windshields. They sat perfectly still behind their steering wheels, faces slack, eyes reflecting the harsh white light like mirrors. Waiting, all of them waiting. The thing on my hood turned back to face me. Its transformation was complete now. No longer even pretending to be human. Something between wolf and spider, with too many joints and skin like wet leather. But when it spoke, it still used my voice. "Park between the Kenworth and the Mac," it said pleasantly. "Shut down your engine. We'll take good care of you." The truck stop was maybe a quarter mile away now. I could see a figure standing by the fuel pumps. Tall, pale, wearing a pilot's jacket and captain's cap. As I watched, it raised one hand in greeting. The hand had too many fingers. I closed my eyes and did the only thing I could think of. I started talking. Not to the thing, not to the radio, just to myself, out loud. My name is Jake Morrison. I was born in Tucson, Arizona, on March 15th, 1983. My mother's name was Sarah. My father's name was Bill. I have a scar on my left eyebrow from a bar fight when I was 24. I drive truck for Morrison Freight. My CB handle is Roadhog. I am 38 years old. I am human. The thing on my hood screamed, not with my voice this time, but with something primal and furious that made my fillings ache. The truck shuddered like we'd hit a pothole, but the speedometer was dropping. 85, 80, 75. I kept talking. I graduated from Tucson High in 2001. I served 2 tours in Iraq. I've been married twice. I have a daughter named Amy who lives in Phoenix with her mother. I haven't seen her in 8 months and I miss her every day. The white lights of the truck stop were flickering now, fading like dying bulbs. The other trucks in the lot were becoming transparent, ghost images wavering in the desert heat, and the thing on my hood was melting, features running together like hot wax. I am Jake Morrison, I said louder. I am 38 years old. I am human. I am real. The truck stop vanished completely, taking its impossible lights and waiting drivers with it. The highway stretched out ahead of me. Normal black asphalt under normal yellow lines. The speedometer showed 65 and holding steady. The thing on my hood was gone. The mirror showed only empty desert. The CB was silent except for the usual background static, but I could still smell it. That sweet rot stench clinging to the air vents, seeping through the cabin like it had stained the very metal of the truck. I drove straight through to Flagstaff, delivered my load, and didn't stop except for fuel. Even then, I kept the engine running and stayed in the cab. I've heard too many stories about truck stops after dark, about drivers who pull in for coffee and never come back out. The sun was coming up when I finally reached the freight yard, golden lights streaming over the mountains, painting everything clean and real and human. I'd never been so happy to see another person in my life. I tried telling the dispatcher what happened. He listened politely, nodded in all the right places, and suggested I take a few days off. Maybe see a doctor about the stress. Highway hypnosis, he called it. Happens to a lot of long-haul drivers. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was all in my head. Fatigue and isolation playing tricks on my mind. Maybe there was never anything running beside my truck. Never anything on my hood. Never a voice on the CB that sounded exactly like mine. But I know what I saw. And I know what I smelled. And 3 days later, when I was getting ready for another run, I found something in the sleeper cab that hadn't been there before. Tucked under my pillow like a sick joke, my old trucker cap. The one I'd lost in Tucumcari last month. It was stained now, dark patches that looked like dried blood, and when I picked it up, I could smell that sweet rot stench all over again. Inside the cap, written in something brown and flaky, was a message. See you on the road, Jake. I threw the cap away, but I kept the note. Had to, because now I know they're out there, hunting the highways, wearing stolen faces and voices, waiting for drivers like me who run the empty roads after dark. I still drive long haul. Bills don't pay themselves, and this is the only work I know. But I've changed my routes. No more runs through Indian country after sunset. No more lonely stretches where you might not see another soul for hours. And I never ever answer the CB anymore unless I can see who's talking. But sometimes, late at night when I'm parked at a well-lit truck stop, I catch myself checking the mirrors, looking for shapes that run too fast and grin too wide, listening for voices that sound too familiar. Because the thing about skinwalkers, they don't forget a face once they've worn it. If you're a driver reading this and you run the desert highways after dark, remember what I learned out there. Don't answer voices that sound like people you know. Don't trust truck stops that appear out of nowhere. And if something starts running alongside your rig at highway speed, don't look directly at it. Don't slow down. And whatever you do, don't let it see that you're scared. They can smell fear from miles away. And once they catch your scent, they'll follow you all the way to hell. Just keep driving and pray for sunrise. It's the only prayer that matters out there on the dark roads where the shapeshifters hunt. Trust me. I know. The CB radio crackled to life at 2:47 a.m. with a distress call from my dead driving partner. Tommy had been killed in a jackknife accident on I-25 3 months ago, but there he was on Channel 19, begging me to pick him up at mile marker 238. The problem was, I was already at mile marker 238, and the only thing standing in my headlights was something wearing Tommy's face like a poorly fitted mask. I should back up and explain how Tommy and I ended up as team drivers in the first place. My name's Rick Castellanos. Been hauling freight for almost 20 years now. Started solo, but the money's better when you run team. One drives while the other sleeps. Keep the wheels turning 24/7. Problem is finding a partner you can trust with your life at 70 miles per hour. Tommy Whitehorse was Navajo, grew up on the res near Shiprock. We met at a truck stop outside Albuquerque in 2020. I was deadheading back to Phoenix after dropping a load. He was looking for a ride to Flagstaff where his cousin worked dispatch for a freight company. Something about him felt solid. You know, the kind of guy who wouldn't steal your wallet while you slept or leave you stranded in the middle of nowhere. We started running together regularly after that. Tommy knew the Southwest like he was born from the desert itself, which, in a way, he was. He could navigate the back roads of Arizona and New Mexico without GPS, knew every truck stop, way station, and shortcut between El Paso and Las Vegas. More important, he understood the unwritten rules of driving through Indian country. There are places you don't stop after dark, he'd tell me during those long midnight runs through reservation land. Places where things hunt that ain't natural. You stay on the main roads. Keep your doors locked. And don't answer voices you recognize unless you can see who's talking. I thought it was just folklore at first. Every culture has its ghost stories, its monsters in the dark. But Tommy wasn't the kind of guy to make up stories for entertainment. When he talked about skinwalkers and shapeshifters, his voice carried a weight that made you listen. The accident happened on a Tuesday in March. We were hauling a load of electronics from Denver to Phoenix, taking turns at the wheel every 4 hours. Tommy was driving the overnight stretch through New Mexico when a drunk driver in a pickup truck ran a red light outside Santa Fe. The pickup hit us at 60 miles per hour, right in the driver's door. Tommy died instantly. The drunk driver walked away without a scratch. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital with 3 broken ribs and a concussion. The company paid for the medical bills and gave me a modest settlement, but they made it clear my team driving days were over. Nobody wanted to partner with a guy whose last co-driver got killed on the job. Bad luck, they said. Bad karma. So I went back to running solo. Phoenix to Denver, Denver to Salt Lake to Las Vegas. The same routes Tommy and I used to run together, but now I was doing them alone. The cab felt too quiet without his stories about growing up on the res, his theories about UFOs and government conspiracies, his terrible jokes that somehow became funny after the 50th telling. The first time I heard his voice on the CB was 6 weeks after the funeral. I was running south on I-25 through New Mexico, maybe 50 miles north of Albuquerque, when the radio crackled to life around midnight. Static, then a familiar voice cutting through the white noise. Breaker 19, this is Navajo Express looking for Roadrunner. You copy, Rick? My hands went cold on the steering wheel. Navajo Express was Tommy's handle. Roadrunner was mine. We'd used those call signs for almost 2 years, but nobody else knew them. They weren't in any CB directory, weren't registered with any club or organization. They were just between us. I grabbed the handset with shaking fingers. "This is Roadrunner. Who is this?" Dead silence. Then, faint laughter that sounded exactly like Tommy's. That dry chuckle he'd make when he thought I was being paranoid about something. I convinced myself it was coincidence. Some random driver who happened to know our old call signs. Maybe someone who'd overheard us talking on previous runs. The mind plays tricks when you're tired and alone on a dark highway. Grief does things to your perception. But it happened again 3 nights later. Same stretch of I-25. Same time of night. This time the voice was clearer. More insistent. "Rick, it's Tommy. I need help, brother. Something's wrong." I keyed the mic immediately. "Tommy's dead. I was at his funeral. Who the hell is this? Rick, listen to me. The accident. It wasn't an accident. They wanted me gone because I knew too much. I found something out here. Something they don't want anyone to see." The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every pause, even the way Tommy always said brother when he was being serious. But Tommy was buried in a cemetery outside Shiprock, 6 feet under desert sand and concrete. "Prove it," I said into the mic. "Tell me something only Tommy would know." Silence stretched for almost a minute. Then, "You've got a tattoo on your left shoulder. Marine Corps, eagle, globe, and anchor. You got it when you came back from Afghanistan. But you told everyone it was from your first deployment to Iraq because you were ashamed of how Afghanistan ended." My blood turned to ice water. I'd never told anyone that. Not my ex-wife. Not my brother. Not even the VA counselor I'd seen for PTSD. Only Tommy knew. And only because he'd walked in on me changing shirts at a truck stop outside Barstow. "That's impossible," I whispered into the handset. "Nothing's impossible out here, Rick. The desert doesn't let go of its dead. Not when they die with unfinished business." I turned off the CB and drove in silence for the rest of the night. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with the whole situation. Not just the impossible conversation with my dead partner, but something deeper. The desert around I-25 looked different somehow. Older. More watchful. Shadows moved between the rocks without anything to cast them. The third call came a week later, and this time Tommy, or whatever was using his voice, wasn't asking for conversation. He was asking for help. "Rick, I need you to pick me up. Mile marker 238 on Highway 66, just west of Gallup. I've been walking for days, brother. I can't make it much further." Highway 66. The old Route 66 that runs parallel to I-40 through Gallup. It's mostly abandoned now, used mainly by locals and the occasional tourist chasing nostalgia for the mother road. Not the kind of place you'd expect to find a stranded driver. "Tommy, what are you talking about? Pick you up? You're dead." "Yeah, I know. But I'm still here, Rick. Still walking the roads we used to drive together. And I found something out here. Something big. Something they killed me to keep quiet." I should have hung up right then. Should have turned off the CB and driven straight home to Phoenix. Instead, I found myself asking, "What did you find?" Not over the radio. Too dangerous. They're listening. "Just come to mile marker 238. I'll show you everything." The line went dead. I sat there in the driver's seat, engine idling, staring at the CB handset like it might start speaking on its own. Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was insane. You don't drive into the desert at 2 a.m. to meet your dead partner. You don't answer distress calls from voices that shouldn't exist. But Tommy's voice had sounded so real, so desperate, and there was something else. A detail that bothered me. He'd mentioned walking for days, like he was physically out there somewhere, stranded and in trouble. What if somehow, impossibly, he'd survived the accident? What if the whole funeral had been a mistake? A case of mistaken identity. I knew it wasn't true even as I thought it. I'd identified the body myself, but grief does strange things to logic, and the desert night has a way of making impossible things seem reasonable. I took the exit for Highway 66. The old route was darker than the interstate, lit only by my headlights and the cold glow of stars overhead. No other traffic, no signs of civilization except for the occasional abandoned gas station or shuttered trading post. The kind of road where you could disappear without anyone noticing for days. Mile marker 238 was in the middle of nowhere, just a reflective post beside cracked asphalt and endless desert scrub. I pulled over and shut down the engine, listening to the sudden silence that follows the death of a diesel motor. No wind, no insects, no sound at all except the faint ticking of cooling metal. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the cab. The air was cold and thin, carrying scents of sage and something else, something metallic and sweet that reminded me of the morgue where I'd identified Tommy's body. "Tommy?" I called into the darkness. "You out there, brother?" Movement in the beam of my flashlight. A figure walking slowly down the center line of the highway, maybe 100 yards away. Medium height, sturdy build, wearing a familiar denim jacket and baseball cap. The walk was right, too. That slight hitch in the left leg from an old rodeo injury. It looked like Tommy. It moved like Tommy. But something in my gut screamed that it wasn't Tommy at all. The figure raised one hand in greeting. "Rick, thank God you came, brother. I was starting to think you wouldn't believe me." The voice carried perfectly across the desert air. Tommy's voice, Tommy's words, even Tommy's relief at seeing an old friend. But as the figure got closer, I could see details that made my skin crawl. The face was right. Mostly. Same strong jaw, same dark eyes, same crooked nose from a fight in high school. But the proportions were slightly off, like a photograph that had been stretched or compressed. The smile was too wide, showing too many teeth. And the eyes reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. "Jesus. Tommy, what happened to you?" I said, taking a step backward toward the truck. "The accident messed me up pretty bad." "Not," Tommy replied, still approaching. "But I'm healing, getting better every day. The desert has a way of healing things, you know?" He was maybe 20 feet away now, close enough that I could see the details that were wrong. His skin had a waxy, artificial look, like latex stretched over a mannequin. His clothes were clean, too clean for someone who'd been walking in the desert for days. And that smell, rotting meat mixed with chemical preservatives. "You look different," I said, hand finding the door handle of my truck. "Death changes a man," he said, and his grin got wider. "Makes you see things differently. Makes you hungry for things you never wanted before." That's when I noticed his hands. The fingers were too long, jointed in places where human fingers shouldn't bend. And the nails, they weren't fingernails anymore. They were claws, black and curved like a bird of prey. "You're not Tommy," I said. The thing wearing my dead partner's face stopped walking. For a moment, its expression flickered, like a TV signal cutting in and out. The too wide grin faltered, and underneath, I caught a glimpse of something else. Something with hollow eye sockets and teeth like broken glass. "Of course I'm Tommy," it said, and now the voice was wrong too. Still Tommy's words, but the rhythm was off, like someone reading from a script in a foreign language. "I'm your old partner, your friend, the guy who saved your ass in that snowstorm outside Denver, remember?" It did remember. That was the thing that made my blood run cold. Whatever this creature was, it had Tommy's memories, his knowledge, his experiences. It knew things only Tommy would know. The snowstorm was outside Salt Lake, I said quietly, the thing's head tilted to one side, further than any human head should turn. Was it? Memory gets fuzzy when you're dead, Rick. Hard to keep the details straight. I was already moving, diving for the open door of my truck. But the thing that looked like Tommy was faster than anything human had a right to be. It covered 20 feet in what felt like a single bound, landing on the hood of my Peterbilt with a sound like a sack of meat hitting concrete. This close, I could see it clearly in the cab lights. The face was melting, running like hot wax, revealing something underneath that belonged in nightmares. Pale skin stretched tight over visible bones, eyes like black holes in a skull, a mouth that opened too wide and kept opening, showing rows of needle-sharp teeth that went back into darkness. "You shouldn't have come alone, Rick," it said in a voice that was no longer even trying to sound like Tommy. Multiple voices now, layered and echoing like it was speaking from the bottom of a well. "But I'm glad you did. I've been so hungry since Tommy died." I slammed the truck into gear and floored the accelerator. The thing on my hood held on somehow, claws digging into the metal, its impossible grin stretching even wider as we picked up speed. In the side mirror, I could see other shapes emerging from the desert. Dozens of them, pale and wrong, wearing faces I almost recognized. The CB radio crackled to life. "You can't run forever, Rick," said Tommy's voice, but now I could see the thing's mouth moving, lips badly synced with the words like a badly dubbed movie. "We know all the roads out here. We know where you sleep, where you eat, where you fuel up." I was doing 70 now on the empty highway, but the thing on my hood wasn't even struggling to hang on. If anything, it seemed to be enjoying the ride, its borrowed face pressed against the windshield, breath fogging the glass from the inside somehow. "Pull over," it whispered, and its voice came from everywhere now. The radio, the air vents, the very steel frame of the truck. "Let me in, Rick. Let me wear you for a while." I remembered what Tommy had told me about skinwalkers, about things that stole faces and voices to hunt in the desert night, about places you didn't stop after dark, and rules you followed if you wanted to live. I reached for the CB handset and keyed the mic. "Mayday, Mayday. This is Roadrunner on Highway 66. Mile marker." "Hell, I don't know what mile marker. I've got a situation out here. Something's on my truck and it ain't human. Static." Then, incredibly, a response. A woman's voice, calm and professional. "Roadrunner, this is Desert Rose. I copy your mayday. What's your exact location?" "I don't know," I said, glancing at the speedometer. Still 70, but the mile markers were blurring past too fast to read. "I'm eastbound on Old 66, maybe 10 miles west of Gallup. There's something on my hood, and it looks like my dead partner. Copy that, Roadrunner. I'm about 5 miles ahead of you. Look for a blue Kenworth with running lights. I'll try to help." The thing on my hood turned to look at the CB, its head rotating a full 180 degrees while its body stayed facing forward. "New friends, Rick? That's not very smart. We don't like it when people interfere." Ahead in the distance, I could see lights. A truck parked on the shoulder, hazards flashing. A figure standing beside it waving a flashlight. As I got closer, I could make out details. A woman in jeans and a leather jacket, Native American features, long black hair pulled back in a braid. "That's me ahead," came the voice on the CB. "Bring your passenger right to me, Roadrunner." I started to slow down, relief flooding through me. Another driver, someone who could help, someone who could witness whatever the hell was happening to me. But as my headlights swept over the woman by the Kenworth, something made me hesitate. She was standing too straight, too still. No normal person stands that rigid, arms at their sides like a soldier at attention. And her eyes, Even from 100 yards away, I could see them reflecting my headlights like mirrors. The thing on my hood began to laugh. "Oh, Rick, you really don't understand, do you? We're everywhere out here. Every voice on the radio, every face in the truck stops, every shadow by the side of the road." I punched the accelerator again, blowing past the woman and her blue Kenworth at 80 miles per hour. In the mirror, I saw her turn to watch me pass, and her head kept turning, rotating impossibly far around like an owl tracking prey. The CB erupted with voices now. Dozens of them, all talking at once, all using the names and call signs of drivers I'd known over the years. Some of them were guys who died in accidents, others just voices from my past that somehow these things, had collected. "Rick, it's Smokey Joe. Pull over, buddy, let's have a beer. Roadrunner, this is Iron Eagle. What's your 20? Good buddy. Rick, help me. It's Tommy, the real Tommy. Don't trust the others." I turned off the CB, but the voices kept coming through the speakers anyway. A choir of stolen identities, all begging me to stop, to help, to let them in. The highway ahead split into multiple roads, none of which looked familiar. Highway 66 doesn't split like that. It's a simple 2-lane road that runs straight as an arrow through the desert. But now I was faced with choices. Left toward lights that looked like a city, right toward what appeared to be mountains. Straight ahead into darkness that seemed to swallow my headlights. I chose straight ahead. The thing on my hood was changing again, cycling through faces like flipping through a photo album. Tommy, then other drivers I'd known, then strangers, then combinations that shouldn't exist. Features mixing and matching, eyes from one face with the mouth of another, creating things that hurt to look at directly. "You can't escape us, Rick," it said in a voice that was everyone and no one. "We are the desert. We are the road. We are every mile you've ever driven and every mile you'll ever drive again." The landscape around me was wrong now. Not desert anymore, but something else. Something that belonged in dreams or fever visions. The sky was the wrong color, too dark but somehow too bright at the same time. The horizon bent upward at the edges like I was driving through the inside of a bowl, and there were others out there. I could see them in my peripheral vision, running alongside the truck, keeping pace at 80 miles per hour. Dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. All wearing borrowed faces and grinning with borrowed mouths. That's when I remembered something Tommy had told me about his grandmother, a traditional healer who'd lived to be 97. She taught him ceremonies, prayers, ways to protect yourself from the things that hunted in the darkness between worlds. I started talking, not to the thing on my hood, not to the voices on the CB, but to myself, to whoever I really was underneath all the fear and confusion. My name is Rick Castellanos. I was born in Tucson, Arizona. My partner Tommy Whitehorse died 3 months ago in a traffic accident on I-25. He was a good man, a good friend, and a good driver. He would never hurt anyone, would never try to lead someone into danger. The thing on my hood screamed, a sound like tearing metal and breaking glass. Its borrowed face began to melt again, running like hot plastic, revealing the horror underneath. Tommy taught me about the desert. I continued, raising my voice over the screaming. He taught me that there are old things out here, hungry things that feed on travelers who get lost or confused. But he also taught me that they can't touch you if you remember who you really are. The landscape was shifting, flowing like water. The impossible roads were fading, replaced by familiar 2-lane asphalt and reflective mile markers. The running figures in my peripheral vision were falling behind, their howls of frustration echoing across the desert. I am Rick Castellanos. I drive a 2019 Peterbilt hauling freight between Phoenix and Denver. I am 41 years old. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I have a daughter named Sarah who lives in California with her mother. The thing on my hood was barely recognizable now, just a mass of pale flesh and exposed bone clinging to the metal with claws that left deep gouges, but it was losing its grip, sliding backward as the truck picked up speed on the now familiar highway. "I am human," I said firmly. "I am alive. I am real. And I'm going home." The thing let go with a final shriek of rage, tumbling off the hood and disappearing into the darkness behind me. The CB radio fell silent. The impossible landscape collapsed back into normal New Mexico desert, complete with sagebrush and distant mesas silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. I drove straight through to Phoenix, delivered my load, and didn't stop except for fuel. Even then, I kept the engine running and stayed in the cab. The sun was coming up when I finally reached the freight yard, and I'd never been so happy to see another human being in my life. The dispatcher asked if I was okay. I looked like hell, he said. Pale, shaky, like I'd seen a ghost. I told him I was just tired, that it had been a long run. He suggested I take a few days off, maybe see a doctor about the stress. Maybe I should. Maybe I should sell the truck, find a different line of work, move somewhere that doesn't have vast stretches of empty desert where things can hunt in the darkness. But this is the only life I know, and bills don't pay themselves, so I still drive long haul. But I've learned to be more careful about which routes I take, and when. No more runs through Indian country after sunset. No more lonely highways where you might not see another soul for hours. And I never, ever answer the CB anymore, unless I can see who's talking. Because the thing about skinwalkers, they collect voices like trophies. Every person they've ever hunted, every conversation they've ever overheard, every scream they've ever caused. It all gets added to their repertoire, and once they have your voice, they can call to anyone you've ever known. They can use your words, your memories, your relationships against the people you care about. Tommy's voice is out there somewhere, stored in the throat of something that wears stolen faces, and someday, someone else is going to get a call on Channel 19 from their dead friend, begging for help at mile marker 238. If that someone is you, remember what I learned in the desert. Don't trust voices that shouldn't exist. Don't answer distress calls from people you've buried. And if something wearing a familiar face asks you to pull over in the middle of nowhere, just keep driving. Drive fast, drive far, and don't look back, because the dead should stay dead. And when they don't, when they come back wearing masks made of memory and longing, they're not coming back for reunion. They're coming back to feed, and they're always hungry. The hitchhiker I picked up outside Shiprock started whistling my grandfather's funeral song, the traditional Navajo chant my family sang at his burial 15 years ago. Problem was, I'd never told anyone I was part Navajo. The ceremony was closed to outsiders, and when I looked over at my passenger, his lips weren't moving, but the whistling kept getting louder. Name's Bobby Yazzie, though most folks just call me Yaz. Been driving long haul for 12 years now, mostly running loads between Phoenix and Denver. My rig's a 2018 Kenworth T680, forest green with chrome stacks, and she's been good to me through 500,000 miles of highway. I keep her clean, keep her maintained, and she keeps me fed. The thing about being a mixed-blood driver is you learn to navigate two worlds. My mother was Navajo, grew up on the res near Window Rock. My father was white, a mechanic from Flagstaff who met her at a trading post in the 1980s. I got my mother's dark hair and strong jaw, but my father's lighter skin and green eyes. Enough native features that I could blend in on the reservation, enough white features that I didn't stand out in truck stops from here to Memphis. Most drivers I work with don't know about my heritage. It's not something that comes up in casual conversation, and I found it's easier to just be Bobby, instead of explaining family history to people who wouldn't understand anyway. The reservation has its own rules, its own dangers, and mixing those worlds can get complicated fast. I learned that lesson the hard way that Thursday night in October. I was deadheading from Albuquerque to Phoenix, running empty after dropping a load of furniture at a warehouse near the airport. No cargo meant no schedule pressure, so I was taking my time, enjoying the drive through high desert country under a clear sky full of stars. The route takes you north through Gallup, then west toward Flagstaff before you turn south toward home. It was just past 10 p.m. when I saw him standing beside Highway 550, maybe 10 miles east of Shiprock. Tall guy, maybe mid-30s, wearing jeans and a denim jacket. Native features, long black hair pulled back in a ponytail. He had his thumb out, but he wasn't looking desperate or aggressive like some hitchhikers get, just patient, like he knew someone would stop eventually. I almost didn't. You don't pick up strangers on dark highways, especially not in that part of New Mexico where help can be hours away if something goes wrong. But there was something about him that seemed familiar, like maybe I'd seen him around the truck stops or knew him from somewhere I couldn't quite place. I pulled over onto the shoulder and rolled down the passenger window. "Where you headed?" I called out. "Phoenix," he said, walking up to the truck. His voice was quiet, respectful. "I can pay for gas." That sealed it. A lot of hitchhikers promise gas money, but most are just looking for a free ride. This guy reached into his pocket and pulled out a roll of 20s, enough to cover fuel and then some. "Climb in," I said. "Name's Bobby. Thomas," he replied, settling into the passenger seat. He was smaller than he'd looked from a distance, maybe 5'8", with weathered hands and the kind of tan you get from working outdoors. "Thanks for stopping. Not many drivers pick up hitchhikers anymore." "Can't blame them," I said, pulling back onto the highway. "Too many crazy people out there." Thomas nodded and settled back in his seat. For the first 20 miles, he was good company. Asked about my route, mentioned he'd done some construction work in Phoenix before heading back to visit family in Shiprock. Normal conversation, nothing that set off any alarms. That's when he started whistling. It was soft at first, barely audible over the engine noise. A traditional melody, the kind of song you'd hear at powwows or ceremonial gatherings. But as we drove deeper into the night, the whistling got clearer, more complex. Multiple voices somehow, harmonizing with itself in ways that shouldn't be possible from one person, and I recognized it. God help me, I recognized every note. It was the funeral song my family had sung at my grandfather's burial, a sacred chant that's only performed at specific ceremonies, never recorded, never written down. The kind of song that gets passed from elder to elder, grandfather to grandson, in moments of grief and reverence. My grandfather had been a medicine man, a respected elder who'd served his community for over 50 years. When he passed in 2007, the funeral was traditional, conducted entirely in Diné-Bizaad with ceremonies that went back generations. Only family and close friends were invited. No outsiders, no photographers, no recordings. Yet here was this stranger, this hitchhiker I'd picked up on a dark highway, whistling those sacred melodies note perfect while staring out the passenger window at the desert landscape sliding by. "That's a beautiful song," I said carefully, keeping my voice neutral. Thomas turned to look at me, and for just a second, his eyes reflected the dashboard lights like an animal's. "My grandfather taught it to me," he said, "before he died. Said it would help lost spirits find their way home." "What was your grandfather's name?" I asked. "Joseph Yazzie," Thomas replied without hesitation. The blood drained from my face. Joseph Yazzie was my grandfather, my mother's father, the medicine man who'd raised me summers on the reservation, taught me about traditional ways, told me stories about the old times when spirits walked more freely through the world. "That's impossible," I said, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. Joseph Yazzie was my grandfather. Thomas smiled, and his teeth were too white in the dashboard glow. Small world, he said. Maybe we're cousins, but we weren't cousins. I knew every member of my extended family, every branch of the Yazzie clan for 3 generations back, and I'd never seen this man before in my life. Yet he knew the funeral song, knew my grandfather's name, even knew details about the ceremony that only family would remember. Tell me about the funeral, I said, testing him. October 15th, 2007. Thomas replied immediately. Shiprock Cemetery, Section 12. Your grandmother wore her traditional velvet dress, the red one with the silver buttons. Your cousin William spoke first, then your uncle Raymond, then you. You sang the closing prayer in Dene Bizad, even though your accent was terrible. Every detail was correct. The date, the location, the order of speakers, even the embarrassing fact that my Navajo pronunciation had been rusty after years of speaking mostly English on the road. Things that only someone who'd been there would know, but Thomas hadn't been there. I was certain of it. How do you know all this? I demanded. Thomas turned to face me fully, and in the reflected light from an oncoming car, I saw his face clearly for the first time since he'd gotten in the truck. The features were shifting, flowing like water, settling into different arrangements. One moment he looked like a stranger, the next, like someone I almost recognized, then like someone else entirely. I know because I was there, he said in a voice that wasn't quite his anymore. Deeper, older, with an accent that belonged to my grandfather's generation. I know because I've been everywhere you've been, Bobby. Every funeral, every ceremony, every sacred moment you've witnessed. The temperature in the cab dropped 20 degrees in an instant. I could see my breath. And Thomas wasn't breathing at all. His chest wasn't moving. No fog on the windows from his exhalation. What are you? I whispered. I'm family, he said. And now his voice was cycling through different tones. My mother's voice, my uncle's, my grandfather's rasp from his final years. I'm everyone who's ever loved you, ever taught you, ever sang you to sleep with the old songs. His face was changing faster now, flickering through features like channels on a television. My grandfather's weathered cheeks, my uncle's strong nose, even my own reflection staring back at me from skin that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. The desert remembers everything, Bobby, the things said in my mother's voice. Every song, every prayer, every drop of blood spilled on sacred ground. And some of us never really leave. I wanted to pull over, wanted to stop the truck and run, but we were in the middle of nowhere with nothing but empty highway and desert scrub for miles in every direction. The nearest town was Shiprock, still 20 miles ahead, and I wasn't even sure this thing would let me reach it. Why are you doing this? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. Because you've forgotten, it said, and now it sounded like my grandfather in his final days, weak and disappointed. You drive these roads, through our sacred lands, but you don't see, you don't listen. You've become just another white man in a big truck, carrying cargo from one nowhere place to another. That's not true, I protested. I remember the stories, the traditions. I haven't forgotten. Then why haven't you been home in 3 years? The thing demanded, and its voice was sharp now, accusatory. Why haven't you visited your grandmother? Why haven't you attended a single ceremony since your grandfather's funeral? The words hit like physical blows because they were true. I'd been so focused on building my business, making money, establishing myself in the trucking world that I'd let my connections to the reservation fade. My grandmother called every few months, but I was always on the road, always too busy to visit. The traditional ceremonies felt like someone else's life, someone else's responsibility. The old ways are dying, the thing continued, cycling through voices of relatives both living and dead, and you're letting them die. Driving through sacred ground like it's just another stretch of highway. Outside the windows, the landscape was changing. The familiar scrub and mesas of northwestern New Mexico were giving way to something older, more primal. Rock formations that hurt to look at directly, twisted into shapes that suggested faces screaming in geological time. The stars overhead were wrong, arranged in patterns that hadn't been seen since before humans walked these lands. "This isn't the way to Phoenix," I said, checking my GPS. The screen was blank, showing no signal, no map, no indication of where we were or where we were going. "We're taking the old road, Thomas," it said. "The one your grandfather walked when he was learning to be a medicine man. The one that connects all sacred places, all times, all possibilities." I could see lights ahead, but they weren't the sodium yellow of highway lamps or the white glow of truck stop signs. These were orange and red, flickering like firelight, arranged in a circle around what looked like a gathering of some kind. "Pull over," the thing commanded in a voice that was everyone and no one. "It's time for you to remember who you really are." "No," I said, pressing harder on the accelerator. "I don't know what you are, but I'm not stopping. I'm going home to Phoenix." "Phoenix isn't your home," it replied sadly. "It never was. You're just hiding there, pretending to be something you're not. But the desert knows. The ancestors know. You can't run from your blood forever." The speedometer showed 80, then 90, then numbers that didn't make sense. But we weren't getting any closer to the lights ahead, and we weren't leaving them behind either. We were trapped in some kind of bubble, suspended between destinations that might not even exist. That's when I remembered something my grandfather had taught me when I was 12 years old, visiting the reservation during summer break. He'd taken me to Spider Rock, the sacred formation that rises from the floor of Canyon Tichelli, and told me about the monsters that used to hunt Navajo people in the early days of the world. "If you ever meet something that isn't what it pretends to be," he'd said, "you speak its true name. You call it what it really is, and you don't let it wear the faces of people you love." I took a deep breath and spoke the word in Dene Bazad. "Yi Naldlushi." The thing that had been calling itself Thomas screamed, not with any human voice, but with the sound of wind through hollow bones, of meat tearing, of something ancient and hungry being denied its prey. Its borrowed features melted away completely, revealing something underneath that belonged in nightmares. Pale skin stretched over visible bones, eyes like black holes in a skull, a mouth that opened too wide and showed rows of teeth that went back into darkness. Its fingers were too long, jointed in places where human fingers shouldn't bend, ending in claws that had left gouges in the passenger seat. "You can't escape what you are," it hissed in a voice like grinding glass. "You can't deny your heritage forever. We are part of you, Bobby Yazzie. We are the price of forgetting." "Maybe," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "But I'm not my grandfather. I'm not a medicine man. I'm just a trucker trying to make an honest living. And right now, I need you out of my cab." I reached over and pulled the door handle. The passenger door swung open, and desert wind howled into the cab, carrying scents of sage and something else, something that smelled like old blood and broken promises. The thing that had never been. Thomas looked at me with those hollow eyes, and for a moment, I saw something that might have been sadness there. "You could have been more," it said in my grandfather's voice. "You could have carried on the traditions, kept the old ways alive. Instead, you chose the white man's road." "I chose my own road," I replied. "And it's time for you to get off." The creature nodded slowly, almost respectfully. Then it simply stepped out. Not jumped, not fell, just stepped out of a truck moving at impossible speeds on a highway that might not even exist, and disappeared into the desert night. The passenger door slammed shut on its own. The cab warmed up instantly, and the familiar hum of the diesel engine was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Outside the windows, The landscape flickered and shifted back to normal New Mexico highway, complete with mile markers and reflective lane dividers. I was alone again, driving through the night toward Phoenix, like nothing had ever happened, but I could still smell it. That metallic scent of old blood and ancient hunger, and in the passenger seat, scratched deep into the upholstery, were claw marks that spelled out a message in my grandfather's handwriting: "Come home." I finished the drive to Phoenix, dropped off my trailer at the freight yard, and took a week off. Told my dispatcher I had family business to attend to, which wasn't exactly a lie. Then I drove my pickup truck north to Shiprock, to the house where my grandmother still lived, where photos of my grandfather still hung on the walls like accusations. She was waiting for me on the front porch, like she'd known I was coming, 92 years old and sharp as a tack, with eyes that had seen too much of both the old world and the new. "You look tired, grandson," she said in Diné Bizad. "I've been driving all night, grandmother." I replied in the same language, surprised at how easily the words came back. "No," she said, studying my face in the morning light. "You look tired in your spirit. Like something's been hunting you." I told her everything. About the hitchhiker, the funeral song, the impossible knowledge of family secrets. About the choice I'd been given and the path I'd chosen. She listened without judgment, nodding occasionally, asking questions that helped me understand what had really happened out there on the dark highway. "Ye naud lushi," she said when I finished, but not the evil kind. The kind that tests people, that tries to bring lost sheep back to the flock. "Your grandfather sent it. Grandfather's dead," I protested. "Death isn't the end of responsibility," she replied firmly. "Especially for medicine men. He's worried about you, about the traditions being lost. He wants you to come home. This is coming home," I said, gesturing to her house, the familiar landscape of my childhood summers. "No," she said sadly. "Coming home means accepting who you are, all of who you are, the Navajo part and the white part, the traditional ways in the modern world. You can drive truck and still honor your ancestors. You can make money and still remember the sacred places." I spent that week on the reservation, visiting relatives I hadn't seen in years, attending a traditional blessing ceremony, learning songs and stories I'd let myself forget. It felt good, like putting on clothes that actually fit after years of wearing the wrong size. But I also went back to trucking, because my grandmother was right. You don't have to choose just one identity. You can be both things, honor both worlds, carry the old ways into new places. Now I make it a point to visit the reservation at least once a month. I've started carrying traditional tobacco in my cab, leaving small offerings at sacred sites when my roots take me through tribal land. And I've never picked up another hitchhiker on Highway 550, especially not after dark, because some tests you only get to take once, and while I passed, barely. I'm not eager for a rematch. If you're a driver reading this, and you run routes through the Southwest, remember that these roads cross sacred ground. Show respect. Leave offerings. And if someone who looks familiar offers to keep you company on a lonely stretch of highway, make sure their reflection shows up in your mirrors before you let them in your cab. Because the desert remembers everything, and the ancestors are always watching. And sometimes, when you've strayed too far from the path, they'll send something to guide you home, whether you want to go or not. The old ways are still alive out here, still walking the highways in borrowed faces and singing the songs that bind all worlds together. You just have to know how to listen, and how to say no when saying yes would cost you more than you're willing to pay.